My privilege to introduce our next speaker is Dr. Stephen P. DenBaars. He's a professor in the Materials and ECE departments here at UCSB. He is the executive director of the Solid State Lighting and Energy Electronics Center at UCSB. Prior to joining UCSB, Professor DenBaars earned his MS in Materials Science and PhD in Electrical Engineering at USC. At UCSB, Professor DenBaars has helped pioneer the field of solid-state lighting using gallium nitride materials. He studies the growth of wide bandgap semiconductors and their use in blue LEDs, lasers, and high-power electronics. He is a co-founder of 3 startup companies based on his research. He is an NAE and NAI fellow, and he has published over 800 articles and filed 63 patents. Today, he has joined us to present his work and vision for the development of UV LED technology for the disinfection and sterilization of COVID-19. Please join me in welcoming Professor DenBaars.
Thanks, Chandra. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Looks good. You're not in presentation mode yet if you want to do that.
That's why isn't it going? There it goes. Great.
It looks good.
Okay, there we go. So yeah, today, LEDs have many uses, and I'll touch a little bit on some of the uses for horticulture and some other things, but because of the timeliness, we've kind of basically redirected a lot of our research towards the ultraviolet spectrum, and that's primarily brought on for the need to disinfect food and water and some other things caused by COVID-19. So this work is done with a fairly small group within our center of about 8 researchers, being led by myself, James Speck, and Suji Nakamura. So to talk a little bit about just the general applications that we look at in the Institute for Energy Efficiency. And in particular, I want to focus on some of the ones that are pertinent to this workshop today. That is ultraviolet light for water purification, and also some of the visible LED work for horticulture that I could touch on later in the panel discussion. But for this talk, just due to the timeliness, and possibly you could even use some of this knowledge to help disinfect some of your things like cell phones or food and water, is the advent of ultraviolet LEDs for the sterilization of viruses, and in particular COVID-19. You can even use this technology to decontaminate masks, and then talk about why that is, why UV light works, as opposed to heating up your mask, which might destroy it. You only have really 2 choices to help decontaminate your personal protective gear. And then I'll talk about our future research in improving the efficiency of the UV LEDs and shifting their wavelengths. And both of those will let us then apply this to broader spectrum things, such as disinfecting food and disinfecting water. So here's a kind of a picture. Let me see if I can minimize this. There we go. Picture of some of the emerging UV and visible applications. Some of them you may or may not be aware of, but in particular, you can buy already these type of water bottles that have an ultraviolet LED in the cap here, and that actually helps disinfect the water in about 30 seconds. So I actually have one of these here, and it's on right now. And one thing is, this is very safe because you can't see the UV LED, but the minute you try to take the cap off, the UV light goes out. It goes on for about a second and it goes off. But this in about 30 seconds will kill any COVID or any other virus, for that matter, that's in the water. So these are quite popular. You're seeing UV applications now in surgical rooms. However, you'll notice there's no doctors present, because you can't, this kind of ultraviolet light that we use, which is called UVC, is hazardous to the skin. So you can't have any of this light on while people are present. But I'll talk about a solution to that we're working on in the future. People are scared to go in the swimming pool again for good reason. Chlorine does kill most of the COVID, but as general precaution, some of the bigger pools add UV lamps, which are mercury-based, not LED-based, to help purify the water. There's been a huge uptick in purifiers, by the way, and as you know, we're all working remotely. But as you can see, I'm in my office today because I'm doing essential research, but I also have the windows open and I don't have any ventilation coming in, because air has been, transmission of COVID has been found to be the predominant factor. And so you can find UV air purifiers now that have added ultraviolet light to the disinfection. Most of these are all sold out, though, unfortunately. This just shows one here that was that's good for your room. But if we can get UV into the air handling equipment quicker, that will help get people back into the offices faster, because that can reduce the COVID active virus in the air. Things like washing machine, LG is building a washing machine now in which they couldn't put mercury lamps in because you don't want to contaminate with the mercury lamps. However, UV LEDs have no toxic material, so they're now putting UV LEDs directly in your dishwasher. And even here's a coffee maker. And here we go. Here's the next one. So this just shows you another application that I was initially going to give this talk more around the horticulture aspect of LEDs and their impact on growing plants in these vertical farming. This is already starting to happen fairly small scale. And it's still, I would say, this is actually a plant factory, a picture in China, but even grocers like Whole Foods are starting to use this. And this is an enormous growth opportunity. And in this case, you only need a little bit of UV light. UV light was found to give the flavors in some of the microgreens. But the main aspect is you use a lot of blue and red LEDs. And the main thing is this grows 24 hours a day, so the plant growth rate is faster. But more importantly, when you're growing these vertical farms, the water usage is about 1 to 5% of that of standard farms, because the water just doesn't go into the soil, but you recirculate it, that is. So that may be something I'll touch on more on in the panel session, but we are doing research in that as well. And even looking at future aspects where we actually do a fiber-based delivery of the light. And in that case, we replace the LED with a laser light source. This one shows you where we do a blue laser into a fiber. And it turns out to grow plants, you pretty much only need red and blue light and a little bit of ultraviolet light. And so this was a demonstration we did here in collaboration with Susan Mazer in the biology department. So I expect we'll start to see that sometime in the distant future, but just showing you some of the applications of light. But really for this talk, I just wanted to touch more on the ultraviolet, what's called the UVC spectrum LED effort, because this is, I think, pertinent to all of us today, but also can be done efficiently and safely. So this shows you here, we're disinfecting some viruses. I actually bought a UV phone disinfector here. I'm not sure you can see this. Let me unplug it. But this one does a phone in about 30 seconds. And I got my phone in here so that you won't hear it. But just showing you that this is starting to, and these are products that only have hit the market in the last few months. And why is it that these materials that I work on, gallium nitride, are being used for ultraviolet and visible light? Well, what's shown here is what's, for the non-semiconductor scientists in the room, the main thing you need to look at here is the colors here. These are the colors we can generate with this material system, which is called aluminum gallium nitride. And this is currently the only material system that you can use to generate ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet, or what's called UVC light, is wavelength shorter than 280 nanometers, shown here. And that's this blue line here. And you can see that only things above this blue line, so that is an alloy on this line here of aluminum gallium nitride, will have a wavelength short enough. However, this material system is also the one that's used to make the white LED lamps that you can buy at Home Depot, or the red, green, and blue colors. I didn't go that way. Basically, you can see as you move from the ultraviolet into the visible, we can hit it by just adding indium. So this is what a typical chip looks like. This is about 200 by 400 microns, and this is what we use to generate the ultraviolet light. So just a little backup about why UV light is very important for for basically disinfection, is that it's one of the few wavelengths, and you actually cannot get UV light from the sun. All the UVC light is filtered out by the ozone layer. So we have to generate UV light basically synthetically on the earth. And when you do that, you can see that it is the only wavelength of light that actually disrupts the DNA and RNA in the microorganism. So deep ultraviolet light will actually break the proteins here. And through these two pathways, either you basically break the adjacent nucleic acids in the DNA or RNA, or you break apart the protein. And the good thing about this technology is there's, to date, there is no UV resistant pathogens that have currently been found. So this is an advantage of UV sterilization in the era of drug resistant microorganisms. It's basically one of the only techniques we have that you can use to, we're fairly sure it will take maybe hundreds of years before there's a UV resistant microorganism. And so how long does this take to sterilize things? So we've, one of our member companies here is Solviosis, and they make a little handheld sterilizer, but they did a study in which they basically took a 1.3 milliwatt LED, and this shows you Petri dish, basically with a SARS-like virus, which has been inactivated, showing you that after about 30 seconds here in these blue Petri dishes, you can pretty much, with what's called a UV dose of 40 millijoules per square centimeter, you can eliminate contamination by a COVID-like virus. So this UV dose is some complicated math here, but really it's pretty simple. If you go down to my little box here, it's if you have basically a couple milliwatt LED and you know how many milliwatts you're hitting per square centimeter. In this case, like in that little phone dish sterilization box, you can disinfect things like your cell phone or the surface of your fruit in about 30 seconds with a typical kind of LED dosage we need. So it doesn't take forever to disinfect. So this is actually fairly fast when you consider some things. However, as we'll see, the case study on personal protective gear, in which you've got to disinfect huge areas, you need much longer times. So how efficient, what's called the efficacy, is this basically is dependent on the spectral sensitivity of the virus. This shows you wavelength here. And basically you want wavelengths that are shorter than 280. So things like, this is the RNA absorptions. So 280 works good. So this is where all the UV lamps, the mercury lamps that you buy, they're currently. So you have maximum UV efficacy here. However, you can't have any direct skin exposure. There's a new class of research we're doing, which is called far UV research, which is centered around 222 nanometer. And the reason we're doing this is you can see it's about 4 to 5 times more efficient than our longer wavelength stuff. Back up. But more importantly, there's been studies in Japan and at Columbia University that show it's safe for the skin and it's actually safe for the eyes. And so they're trying to get FDA clearance for this. But in the meantime, we're having to help them develop the correct wavelengths for this technology. And a lot of other companies would like to see a high efficiency 222 nanometer LED. Here's just a case study that I want to show you that was done not by our group, but by the NIH, in which they looked at disinfecting an N95 masks. As you know, I mean, I'm sure you all have a few of these at home, and you're actually supposed to disinfect them or throw them out after one day. A lot of us are using them for many days. I can throw my UV mask in my little cell phone sterilizer. And the reason you can't basically disinfect these with alcohol or soap and water is because of the activated charcoal inside, and they're composed of some things that will deteriorate pretty quick if you try to heat them up in an oven, like cellulose and rubber. So these are the current list of CDC approved decontamination mechanisms. So right now there's only really 3 recommended. There's hydrogen peroxide, but this is a hydrogen peroxide oven that you have to buy, that hospitals have. You can use UV sterilization. So this is proven to be 99.9% effective for MERS and SARS. Or you can use moist heat in an oven. They also looked at ethanol, ozone, and steam is another way, ethylene oxide, but we'll see there's some problems with these techniques. Again, in this case, all the coronaviruses have these RNA in them, and basically RNA lacks a robust mechanism for sequence proofreading. Means it's actually much easier to destroy this than DNA. So this shows you the top 4 methods to decontaminate personal protective gear. Current one, probably in the highest dominance, is vaporized hydrogen peroxide. So this is good because it does it in about 10 minutes, and it's good for up to 3 uses. However, you can't buy this at home. This is currently fairly big ovens made by Panasonic, and they're typically only available in hospitals. UV sterilization is good for the same, at least up to 3 reuses. We now think it's good for up to 6, possibly more. The only disadvantage here is because the UV LED powers are still low, and the LEDs are positioned 50 centimeters away from the personal protective gear, it takes about an hour. And this shows you the virus kill rate here, showing you have to go out to about 55 minutes because you want to get down to this dashed line here. Ethanol, you can see, is very fast. However, as we can see, ethanol basically damages the mask after the first try. So that is, you cannot, unfortunately, disinfect your N95 masks with alcohol, with ethanol in this case. So it's not recommended anymore. And really, one method you could do is you can heat them up in the oven at 70 degrees C for an hour. That also works, but unfortunately, that damages the rubber in the material. So that only works for up to 2 times. So right now, really, the hydrogen peroxide and the UV sterilization are being used in hospitals to recycle some of the personal protective gear. Just talking about how the company we work with, does some of the UV efficacies evaluated, and we're working with the biology department here to hopefully work with a professor there who will help us get the ability to do this at UCSB. But basically, it's a fairly long process where you've got to maintain a basically inoculated form of the SARS-CoV mask deposited on your whatever you're trying to disinfect. And in the study at this NIH, you can see that their power density was basically 1,000 times lower than what the Seoul Semiconductor study was of, and this is why it took an hour instead of 30 seconds. So they basically pulled back the LEDs to 50 centimeters. And so basically after several days, you could see where you're growing the virus and where it's not growing. And the interesting thing is their study came up to pretty much the same millijoules per square centimeter that the Seoul Semiconductor study, which was done at the Korean University of Health and Sciences, which is that they needed 38 millijoules per square centimeter. So these kind of power levels of getting up to 40 milliwatts would mean that you could disinfect eventually in a second. And so that means we just need to improve the efficiency and power of our LEDs at the right spectral width, and this could be a much faster mechanism. And it just shows you this was for the earlier SARS virus, basically how you can just see here in a small Petri dish, what's called the cytopathic effect, basically for the various doses of UV that you can get down into these fairly safely. So, I guess the last part of my talk, I just want to show you the status of our current project and show you the power levels we're getting are now to the level that you can speed up the disinfection. We use, we're basically in the materials and electrical engineering department. So this is actually what a cross section of our chip looks like. So we have a large number of graduate students working on this material, P aluminum gallium nitride, and combining that with N aluminum gallium nitride. This gets you what's called a PN diode, and where you generate light at this middle active region here. And in particular, we've developed technologies where we put high reflectivity mirrors on it. And over the last actually over the last decade, we've optimized the right roughness or light extraction technology with a KOH backside etch so that all the light comes out one side of the chip after we've removed the substrate. So these are so-called thin film flip chips, and they give you very good efficiencies. And as I've shown here, here's the wavelengths. So in the 280 nanometer range here, with the stars here, the UCSB work, we're now able to get to up to the similar to the best efficiencies in the commercial devices. There's one result up here at 20% for an experimental device. However, this was at a power level that was so low that it's not commercially usable yet. It was some work done in Japan. So for the most part, basically our effort is on par with where the commercial world is. And it just shows you what's called fairly narrow, beautiful spectrums coming out of the LED. The more important thing that we've contributed to with our member companies is increasing the power you can get from our LEDs. So I showed you earlier, Seoul was using 1 to 2 milliwatt chips. This shows you that we can now, from a standard size chip, get 7.6 milliwatts, which you could take as either reducing the time to disinfect by a factor of 6, or you could increase the area. And so this was obtained after we roughened the chip, shown here in red, whereas when we didn't roughen the chip, we only got 4 milliwatts out. So one of the companies we work with in our center, Solbiosis, is making commercial products. They're also employing some roughness technique that they've licensed from us. So this is then the impact of getting to the power levels you need now to disinfect things like water and do it in a much faster means. Shown here, we've tried to go shorter in wavelength. This shows you as we go shorter in the wavelength, the efficiency drops from about 4%, so we're now around 2% efficiency. So we have to improve this efficiency a lot, and this is our roadmap here to improve that. Why does efficiency matter? Well, it's very similar to solar cell efficiency. The more efficient you make your LED or solar cell, the more energy you produce or save. And so right now we're in a 2-4% range, but the LED light bulb you buy in the store is about 50% efficient. So we have about a factor of 25 improvement we can do by employing further research in this area. So right now, this shows you the red curves are where we're actually at. We're in the 2 to 4% range. And after we employ LEDs with tunnel junctions, we'll be able to get up into the 20% range, we think, in just a few short years, eventually targeting 50%. And what that will let you do is basically, hopefully one day, just put all your food in a box when you bring it home, turn on the UV light, and within a few seconds, you can take the food out rather than spraying it with alcohol, which hopefully you're all doing right now. Another thing, if we shorten the wavelength into the 230 nanometer regime, you can imagine that you could actually start to use this directly in the surgical rooms without doctors having to leave the room. Currently, they have to leave the surgical table, but at wavelengths below 230, this will allow humans to be present during the disinfection process. So this is some of the current work and progress we've done. Just showing you how really detailed the science is in here, but basically these acronyms stand for dislocation densities, and some of our improvements have been in reducing the dislocation densities. They used to be 1 billion per square centimeter. We're now around 10 to the 8. We've also reduced the voltage quite a bit. Actually, we're now around 5 volts. So as we lower the voltage, the wall plug efficiency goes up. Extraction efficiency's improved a lot. And so as we employ some of these techniques, we'll be able to make, hopefully one day, very efficient UV disinfection and other tools. So this shows the total group working on LED research, and currently the FAR UVC work, because we had to pretty much jumpstart this work just 6 months ago, has been started with a crowdfunding site, and shortening the wavelength, as I mentioned, will let us basically expand the UV LED to work to all the places in public spaces that you need it, which would be air handling. You could even imagine having UVC on the airplane. Cruise ships, I'm sure, would love to have UVC light. That's safer than existing UVC. Currently, the only disinfection method they do is just a HEPA filter. But if you add UVC to the filtration system, then you'll give you another level of security that none of the virus is going to get recirculated through. Currently, the only sources for this FAR UVC are lamps. Excimer lamps are very expensive and fragile, but similar to LED technology dropping in cost for the lighting aspect, we hope that our research will enable that one day for you to go to the store and buy air handling equipment or purifiers with very cheap and very efficient UV air handling and water purification. So with that, I'll take questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Steve. That's really great. So we have a few questions from our audience already. One question is, can UV handle or kill other things like Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, all problems in food processing?
Yes, it can. It's been shown, and there's several studies on this. Bacteria are just also not UV resistant, and viruses. So I have seen it used in disinfecting cooking surfaces. So they made a UV lamp that at night when the chefs leave, they just turn on the UV. And in the biology department here, they disinfect their hood at night. They just turn on the UV lamp for like 30 minutes. You know, it's actually surprising to me that it really hasn't like gone into meat packing and some of these other food processing things. Like you mentioned, Salmonella. I know cantaloupe farms have a big problem with that. But, like I said, we've got to be able to make it cheaper and widespread. Up to the COVID epidemic, the UV LED market was extremely small, less than 50 million, but I think it's going to grow about, I heard it's going to be tenfold this year, and that's entirely limited by the lack of production equipment and companies that are working on it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, looks like there's another question in the chat here. Can UVA or B be used for disinfection with other mechanisms? Yes. We'll talk about what is UVA and B. So these are the UVAs like 400 nanometers down to about 350, and UVBs like from 350 down to 280. So these are the kind of the longer wavelength UV. And it has been shown that these other wavelengths can also be used, and they're a little less, they don't give you as bad a sunburn as UVC, but you need other materials. Like, it turns out you need titanium dioxide to be used in combination with the UVA. And the way that works is it's a photocatalytic effect. That is, the violet light hits the titanium dioxide and generates electrons on the surface, which then kill the bacteria. Most importantly, those other wavelengths are good for bacteria, but they haven't been shown to kill the viruses. Bacteria is actually easier to kill than the virus. And so that also works. Also, there's just enough UVB, and I didn't show it, but in that spectral range, there was some killing going on of the DNA with the UVB. It takes 7 hours. So the CDC recommendation for if you want to put your mask in the sun, it's about 7 hours. So it takes a long time, but it will work. So I shouldn't say that all UVB won't work. It just takes, instead of 30 seconds, it takes 7 hours in the sun. And what you're doing is you're giving the virus a bad sunburn. So if it's not sunny, you're out of luck.
Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, Steve, this is fascinating. I've been wondering, since air transmission through the air is a big issue, and buildings and building air systems or cruise ships are obviously a big problem. Can you stick the UVC in the plenums or in the ductwork where nobody can see it, but it could be consistently knocking stuff out in the air systems? Is that being done?
Yeah, that study is being done as we speak. The company we work with, along with another company in the US, are working with air handlers right now. It will work, and they've shown that it's very effective, especially when combined with a filter, because the filter slows it enough. What's hard is if you don't have the filter and you're just trying to kill it moving through the air, you need powers. You need like watts of power. But as long as you can slow down the virus and have it stop on a surface of a HEPA filter, they were showed that they're able to kill it on the HEPA filter. So, and like I said, it's just getting these air handling companies to start implementing it. Cruise ships don't want to use mercury. Submarines don't want to use mercury lamps. So that means they have to use LED. And the only problem is actually a cost problem. What I didn't tell you, it's quite costly. Like that little mobile phone disinfection thing I bought was $50, or that water bottle. And that's because the UV LED cost is very high now. It's about $6 an LED. And that's just due to low volumes. For your light bulb, it's $1 now for an LED lamp. So we've got to make the powers and costs come down. And when you do that, then air handling will be exactly like you said. You just put it in a plenum, and you can put the longer wavelength. You don't have to go to the far UVC. You could use it now. In fact, in my office at UCSB, I do have an air handler here with UV in it. Okay. Unfortunately, it is sold out. Otherwise, I'd be telling Henry Yang to buy all the professor's one. But there are a couple online you can buy, and if anybody's not working at home or anybody's working in office, especially if there's other people around, you might consider buying a purifier with a HEPA filter and UV in it, because it is more efficacious.
Thank you.
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, Steve, obviously I'd like to use a laser in terms of getting higher intensity, and what's the shortest wavelength laser you're being able to make, and what's the prospects for making a UVC laser? Yeah,
the prospects are good long-term, but the shortest wavelength demonstrated to date for this material system is 364. So that's UVA. So we have a long way to go to get to UVC, to get to 200. However, what's called a photo pumped laser. That is, when somebody pumps it with a neodymium YAG, has been shown to be 250. So in the right wavelength range. So we know the material is capable of it, but nobody's made a UVB or a UVC laser yet. And as you know, once we do that, the power levels then can be in the watt range, and that would change it. But then we got to be really careful about safety, because now you got a lot of UV power and it's coherent. So we'd probably have that in the plenum as well, like Robert had mentioned, make sure we keep it. But so I think we're about 4 years away from getting a UVC laser. We could do it. It's just going to take time.
So one of the questions on our Q&A is about the horticulture project that you talked about. The question is, it said on the slide, I believe the water use is stated at 1 to 1.5%. The question is that with or without recycling in the facilities condensation?
Oh, sorry, that was 1 to 5%. And
1
it's
to 5.
cycled. That's a complete hydroponic system where it goes down, and then they even have it in a clean room so that the humidity, they're not losing it to evaporation. Like I said, Whole Foods is the only one I'm aware that's implemented it on top of their stores in Texas, and that was for growing basil and some microgreens. But that big picture thing I showed you, that was a hydroponic farm in China.
Oh, very interesting. Another question Baruz raises, it's just interesting. In terms of total energy requirements, how does UV LED disinfection compare to other methods?
Wow, yeah. So so mercury lamps are more efficient right now. They're about 20%, and UV LEDs are about 4 or 5%. So that means that they're 4 times less efficient than the mercury lamp, which is the opposite of LED lighting, where we're more efficient. So that's why we're trying so hard to improve the efficiency. However, the problem is you can't put mercury lamps in food facilities because of obviously mercury poisoning. So that's why you're seeing it in places like you wouldn't put a mercury lamp in my water bottle right here. You would use an LED. And so we've got to go a long way to there. The UV looks more efficient than the heat disinfection though. But I'd say in terms of energy efficiency, the vaporized hydrogen peroxide is the most energy efficient.
Very interesting.